That year, when I was 10, was the summer everything changed. I remember the air tasted sweeter, and the fields stretched out like oceans of gold just behind our house. My dad decided it was high time I learned to hunt on my own, a rite of passage, he called it. He pushed a rifle into my hands one afternoon, patted my shoulder with a heavy, calloused hand, and pointed me toward the woods. I was too proud to let fear show on my face, though my insides were twisted into knots. I stepped into the shadowed edge of the forest, where the trees stood like ancient guardians. They loomed overhead, their branches whispering secrets I couldn't understand. The late afternoon sun spilled through the canopy, dappling the ground with patches of light that danced as leaves fluttered in the soft breeze. I hadn't gone far before the world around me started to change. The wind hushed, and the forest grew unnervingly still, as if holding its breath, waiting. Every crack of a twig underfoot thundered in the sudden silence, like a slap on the skin, and my every breath seemed amplified, echoing off the trunks of the stoic trees. A feeling of being watched crept over me, prickling the back of my neck. Instinct told me to turn back, but stubbornness and pride surged, keeping my feet moving deeper into the thicket. My dad always said the woods had a life of their own, and I'd laughed, but now the memory of his voice hung in the air like a warning I should have heeded. I pushed through a wall of thick underbrush and came upon a small clearing bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow. It wasn't the sunlight I knew, it was something else, something far less natural. A strange silence enveloped me, too complete and oppressive. It was like stepping into another world. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the clearing. My heart lurched in my chest, freezing the blood in my veins. It looked human at first, but as I squinted against the eerie light, dread poured through me. The proportions were wrong just slightly, enough to unsettle something primal in my gut. Its skin was pale, shimmering faintly, like pearl in the wan light, and its eyes, they were wide, too wide, almost luminous, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice stuck like a stone lodged in my throat. The urge to run surged through my legs, but I couldn't move, as though the forest itself held me fast. The figure tilted its head, examining me with an almost childlike curiosity, yet there was an ancient knowing in its gaze that belied that innocence. It was a gaze that stripped me bare, exposing fears I didn't even realize I held. A sudden rustle snapped me out of my trance. I spun around, heart pounding, my grip hardened around the rifle, finger itching against the trigger. When I glanced back, the clearing was empty, and the strange glow had dissipated, swallowed by the dimming light of twilight. The forest was alive again, buzzing with its whispers of birds and insects, as if it had never been otherwise. Trembling, I backed slowly into the safety of the trees, compelled to get as far away from that place as possible. But the image stayed burned in my mind, a shadow that followed closely, becoming part of the path as I stumbled back through the woods. Whatever I had seen, whatever it was, shouldn't exist. Yet, as I sat breathless on the edge of the woods, the sinister truth seeped in. The realization was cold and unyielding, a wedge that would drive a permanent chasm between the world I'd known and the one that existed beyond. I could never truly go home again, not with the weight of what I couldn't unsee lingering within me. And more chillingly, the haunting certainty that whatever it was, it had let me see it for a reason. The night after my encounter in the woods stretched on like an unending shadow, thick and suffocating. Sleep was a distant dream, always slipping through my fingers just when I thought I'd grasp it. Every creak of the old farmhouse was a siren, threatening to draw that twisted silhouette back to me. I lay wide-eyed, tangled in sheets damp with sweat, ears pricked for any sound that didn't belong. The morning didn't bring relief. Instead, it burned too bright, as if trying to expose secrets better left hidden. My father was already at the table, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with the stale scent of yesterday's hunting gear. I watched him for a long moment, his hands steady as he wiped down a rifle. The ritual was comforting in its predictability, a sharp contrast to the chaos inside me. I wondered if he could see the fracture lines splintering across my mind, if he knew just what I was starting to become. "Get dressed," he said without looking up. "We go again." His voice was gravel, each word tumbling like rocks down a hill. I wanted to protest, to tell him about the creature and its impossible form, but the words shriveled in my throat. It sounded ridicule. O's even to me, like a childish nightmare that couldn't possibly exist under the sun. I imagined his response, the disbelief turning to disappointment. So I kept quiet, nodding instead, swallowing down my fear like broken glass. The walk into the woods was different this time. The trail seemed narrower, the trees more menacing. Each step was a struggle against the tide of dread rising within me. The silence between us was a living thing, a beast with 1,000 unspoken questions clinging to its fur. My father, with eyes forward and mind preoccupied, either didn't notice or chose to ignore the tension wrapped around us. We reached a clearing, a place familiar yet now tainted with the memory of what I'd seen. My father set up his post on a fallen log, beckoning me to sit beside him. I hesitated, glancing around. The woods held their breath, as if wary of some unseen predator. He started to explain more about tracking. His words were a jumble of phrases, half lost in the winds weaving through the trees. He pointed out trails, signs of deer or fox, but my mind struggled to focus. My eyes would dart away, scanning the perimeter for any hints of that impossible figure. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, was a warning that never came. We sat in that tension, hours bleeding into each other, until the sun began its slow retreat beyond the canopy. The air grew cooler, heavier. My father finally stood, stretching as he looked at me. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice almost kind, "you did good." I nodded, though my insides were twisted tight. The walk back was quieter than the first and no less oppressive. The sky above was a tapestry of bruised clouds, stitching darkness into the horizon. The farmhouse came into view, a silhouette in the twilight. It felt impossibly distant, another world altogether. That night, as I lay in bed, sleep was a deceitful thing. It came in fits and starts, lured by exhaustion only to be snapped away by the slightest sound. My dreams were fragments, flashes of twisted limbs and eyes like blackened pits. Each time I woke, I half expected to see that figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching with an unnerving patience. Days passed in a fog of routine and fear. I went to the woods with my father, went through the motions of learning to hunt, yet hunting was the last thing on my mind. The presence of that creature gnawed at my thoughts like a rat at the wires, threatening to short-circuit everything I thought I knew. And then one afternoon, things changed again. We had wandered deeper than before, chasing some elusive prey. The trees were denser here, their shadows a tangle of dark limbs reaching for the ground. My father was ahead, focused, oblivious to the rising unease that coiled around my spine. That's when I heard it, a low hum, barely audible, resonating through the air like a warning. It set my teeth on edge, vibrating through my bones. I looked around, heart pounding, and saw nothing but trees and shadows. The hum grew louder, more insistent, as if it was a voice forming from the very marrow of the forest itself. I opened my mouth to call for my father, but the sound clamped down on me like ice. My voice wouldn't come. I was rooted, paralyzed again by this new threat. My father moved on, slipping between the trees, vanishing into the undergrowth before I could muster the strength to follow. The hum built to a crescendo, becoming a chorus of hidden voices singing in a language I couldn't understand. The air was alive, crackling with static, and I was caught in the center of this unseen storm. And then, abruptly, it stopped, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to roar in my ears. When I finally found my voice, my father was too far to hear. I started to run, panic thrumming with every heartbeat. The woods around me blurred, the world a smeared painting in shades of green and brown. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to escape the thrall of the forest's song. I burst into a clearing, chest heaving, heart a wild drum in my ribcage. And there it was, a figure, not the one I'd seen before, but similar in its wrongness. It stood still, watching with eyes that seemed to devour the light. The familiar terror gripped me, but this time something else bubbled up, a fierce, unyielding resolve. I took a step forward, then another. The figure tilted its head, curious, as if it hadn't expected this reaction. The air between us was charged, a magnetization drawing me closer, though my instincts screamed to run. I reached out a hand, trembling, half expecting it to pass through air and shadow. But it was real, solid, as if the rules of the world had shifted to accommodate its presence. Just before I touched its skin, a voice, not wholly mine, filled my head. A simple, chilling command, remember. The moment shattered like glass, and I found myself alone again. The figure vanished as if it had never been. The clearing was empty, save for the lingering echo of that voice. I stumbled back toward the path, senses reeling. My father was there, face strained with worry and a hint of accusation. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. The mark this encounter left was enough to tell its own story. We walked back in heavy silence, the world rearranging itself in subtle ways only I seemed to notice. And as the farmhouse loomed closer, I thought about that command. About what I was meant to remember and the things I wished I could forget. I hadn't set foot beyond the boundary of those trees since that summer. The years passed, and adulthood wrapped around me like a heavy, ill-fitting coat. But the memory of the woods and what dwelled there remained sewn into the fabric of my being. My father's face softened over time, his hair graying like the ashen sky before a storm, but he never spoke of the hunt again. I never asked. We shared a quiet understanding, a silent pact bound by fear and respect for the unknown. My father passed last winter. The earth around me felt colder, more forbidding. The responsibility of his affairs fell to me, and in sorting through the remnants of his life, I found myself drawn to the last place we shared together, those woods. I told myself it was for closure, the kind psychologists preach about, but deep down, I feared it was something else. A pull, perhaps, from whatever lurked in the shadows of those trees, whispering a forgotten promise. The trek began just like before, with the smell of damp leaves and rich soil beneath my boots. Each step I took was measured, cautious, as if the ground might give way to something unseen. The trail was narrower now, branches hung low, gnarled fingers twisting in the wind. I could hear the woods breathing around me, a low, rhythmic pulse that matched my own anxious heartbeat. My breath clouded in the crisp air, mingling with the memory of my father's quiet guidance. But this time, there was only my silence to accompany me. The sky darkened as I passed the spot where we'd set up our camp all those years ago. It felt like I was waking a dormant creature with my presence. The air thickened, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me. This was the moment I'd been dreading, a reckoning long overdue. As I pressed deeper into the woods, the world seemed to warp, colors bleeding into one another like watercolor on damp paper. Then I heard it, a low hum, almost musical. It was the same unsettling tune that had haunted my nights, textured with the cold caress of a lingering nightmare. I stopped, feeling my skin prick with ancient dread. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever had been waiting in these woods was awake. My gaze drifted to a clearing, a place both familiar and foreign. The ground was soft here, footfalls hushed into secrecy. I felt drawn to the spot where the hum was loudest, my feet leading me without consent to the very heart of the disturbance. And there, framed by the dying light, was the figure, indistinct, draped in shadow, just as it had been all those years ago. Still, unyielding, it beckoned without movement. The silence between us stretched, a taut wire ready to snap. I was no longer a child, nor tethered to my father's expectations, yet the grip of fear was palpable, a chain around my heart. The figure remained motionless, its presence a force that pushed against the natural order, bending reality to an unseen will. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers or perhaps plead for understanding, but the words died on my tongue, absorbed by the thick, coiling air. In that suspended moment, something shifted. The world around me went still, impossibly silent. My chest tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. Then, with an agonizing slowness, the figure raised a hand, pointing to something just beyond my line of sight. My instincts screamed to flee, but curiosity won, a compulsion too powerful to resist. Following the line of the outstretched finger, my eyes caught a flicker of movement. It was subtle, a ripple through the dense underbrush, like a breeze that disturbed nothing but my sense of peace. As I stepped closer, the figure faded into the background, its purpose seemingly fulfilled. The hum lingered, seeping into my skin, leaving me raw and exposed. What I found was bewildering, a small clearing, untouched by time's march. In its center stood a sapling, vibrant and out of place, its roots embedded deep into the earth. Yet it was the object nestled at its base that stole my breath, freezing me in place. It was a photograph, weathered but unmistakable, a snapshot of my family, taken years before my birth. The implications churned my stomach. How had this picture survived? Why was it here, in this place beyond understanding? My family was being shown to me, an unspoken link between past and present, mortality, and whatever lay beyond. The revelation was chilling, an understanding that blurred the lines I once clung to. This was not Chloe. Sure, it was an opening, a doorway into something much larger. The hum grew softer, retreating into the earth as if bidding farewell. I felt it all, the weight of knowledge, the pull of mystery. As I turned to leave, I knew these woods had marked me, woven me into their silent tapestry. Whatever answer I sought no longer mattered. In returning, I hadn't just revisited my past, I had awakened a truth that would shadow my steps forever. The woods watched as I walked away, a witness to my silent vow to never return. As the path led me back to the edge of familiar ground, a chill crept up my spine. It wasn't over. I felt it in the rustle of leaves, the whispering wind that carried an unfinished story. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods had more to tell, that I was now part of its eternal silence. My life, my family, my reality, all tied to a darkened place where the light barely dared to tread. And the question remained. When the hum called again, as it surely would I be able to resist its pull?